The game starts with Sam this time, who plays a Necroblossom Snarl, revealing a forest, and casts Hardened Scales. The other 3 players each only play a land per turn, with John playing a tapped Rakish Theater, surveilling to the top, Tom playing a Zagoth Triumph tapped, and Extra playing an island. Looking to continue his counter multiplication, Sam plays a forest, and taps out for Winding Constrictor. He passes to John. John plays an island, then casts a Talisman of Creativity before passing. Tom plays an Overgrown Tomb for turn, paying 2, and casts his commander, Ezio, Auditore da Firenze. With nothing else, he passes to Extra. Extra does a repeat of turn 1 with an island, and a pass back to Sam. Sam plays a forest, casts a Reki, the history of Kamigawa, then swings at John for 2 with his Winding Constrictor before passing, having John flash in a Spectral Sailor on end step, losing 1 life. On his turn, John plays a Morphic Pool and casts Gem Cutter Buccaneer, triggering his effect to make a tapped treasure. He then attacks Sam with Sailor and passes. Tom plays a Deathcap Glade, then goes to combat. He attacks John with Ezio, with John declaring no blocks. In his second main, he casts Felwar Stone into a free-running Ramses, Assassin Lord, then passes to Extra. Extra plays another island, and finally casts his first spell in Leonardo da Vinci. After that resolves, he passes back to Sam. Sam first casts Raihan, Last of the Abzan, triggering Reki to draw, followed by a tapped Underground Mortuary, surveilling to the top. John plays Shipwreck Marsh, and casts his own commander, Edward Kenway, triggering Buccaneer to make a tapped treasure. He then attacks Sam with Sailor again, before triggering Edward on end step, making a treasure, and passing the turn. Tom plays a tapped Shadowy Backstreet, surveilling to the graveyard. He then goes to combat, attacking Extra with Ezio and Ramses. Having dealt damage with an assassin, Tom free runs in a Big Game Hunter, destroying Edward with his effect, followed by 3 visits, getting himself a Zeotora's Proving Grounds. After that, he passes. Extra plays an Inventor's Fair, then activates Leonardo to draw, discard, and make an O2 copy of the discarded Nexus of Becoming. He then goes to combat, triggering Nexus to exile and make a 3/3 copy of Urza, Lord High Artificer, who makes a construct upon entering. In his second main, he uses Urza to cast Bite of Thassa and passes back to Sam. Sam plays a forest and casts Kadama of the West Tree, triggering Reki to draw. Seeing Extra's massive expansion, he sends all his creatures his way, trying to keep him in check. Kodama triggers, getting a forest, before passing the turn. John plays a Steam Vents, paying 2 life. He recasts his commander, Edward Kenway, triggering Buccaneer to make a tapped treasure. He then follows it up with Francisco, Foul Marauder, once again triggering Buccaneer to make a treasure. Wanting some Francisco triggers, John sends his Sailor at Tom, and Buccaneer and Extra. Both take the hit, triggering Francisco to explore 2 times, adding a land, and putting a spell to the graveyard. His turn ends with an Edward trigger, making 2 triggers, and the pass. Tom plays an Isolated Chapel, followed by a Vorpal Sword, which he immediately equips onto Ezio. Once equipped, he sends his entire army at Extra, setting up the win with Ramses. In his second main, he free runnings an Orchin Assassin, and uses Terminate to get rid of Nexus. With that out of the way, he passes to Extra. On Extra's upkeep, Fair triggers, gaining 1 life. He adds another island to the collection, then again activates Leonardo, this time making a 0-2 Sharding Sphinx. Next he casts World Wake Helm and sends his construct at Sam, triggering Biden to draw, and Sphinx to make a Thopter plus a map thanks to Helm. In his second main, he casts Unctus, Grand Metatech, and passes back to Sam. Sam plays an Undergrowth Stadium, then finally casts his commander, Cleopatra, Exiled Pharaoh, which also triggers Reki to draw. Once resolved, he sends Raihan at extra, triggering Kadama to get a forest. He then casts Branching Evolution, and on end of turn, Cleopatra triggers, giving 6 counters to both Reki and Kadama. John first casts Ramirez de Pietro, Pillager, losing 2 life and making 2 treasures, alongside the treasure made by Buccaneer. Next he sends Sailor at Tom and Francisco at Sam, trying to find a solution to the upcoming Ramses situation. Both players take the hit, triggering Francisco twice to leave an important card on top, while also having Ramirez exile both their top cards. In his end step, Edward also triggers, making 2 treasures, before passing. Tom plays a Shine Shadow Snarl tapped, and attacks with everything at extra, trying to snag the win with Ramses. Extra is then forced to block Orchin with all his blockers, and before damage is dealt, John activates Sailor to draw, and cast Terminate onto Ramses, taking away Tom's dreams of a win. Damage is then dealt, and Tom passes to extra. On extra's upkeep, Fair triggers, gaining 1 life. He then sacrifices Fair to get Portal to Phyrexia, followed by a Leonardo activation, first triggering Unctus to draw and discard, then resolving the effect to make an 0-2 Portal to Phyrexia, having each opponent sacrifice 3 creatures when it enters. This triggers Cleopatra, having Sam lose 2 life and draw 6 cards, while Raihan gains 14 counters due to this effect. After the triggers are resolved, the turn is passed back to Sam. Sam plays a forest, and casts Vraska Joins Up, giving a Death Touch counter to Kadama, not knowing it gives it to all his creatures. He then casts Surak and Goreclaw, and attacks Extra with both his creatures. Extra is then forced to block Raihan with everything but Portal, and after blocks are declared, he activates Urza twice, tapping the Thopter and himself for blue mana, triggering Unctus twice to draw and discard. He then casts Resculpt on Kadama, barely being able to stay alive. John plays a Tainted Peak, and casts March of the Drowned, returning Ramirez and Francisco to his hand. He then recasts Francisco, Foul Marauder, triggering Buccaneer, followed by Fell Flagship, and then attack with both available creatures at extra, putting the final nail in the coffin. Francisco triggers, leaving a card on top, and in his second main, he casts Malcolm, Alluring Scoundrel, again triggering Buccaneer. Next he crews Flagship with Francisco and Malcolm, followed by another crew with itself, having Edward make a total of 5 treasures in the end step. Tom plays a Haunted Ridge for turn, and slowly begins to rebuild with Ezio, Auditore de Firenze, and equipping Sword onto him. With no other resources to speak of, he passes back to Sam. Sam plays a forest, and decides to finish this game for good with Varol's The Scar Strike, triggering Surak to gain 4 counters and haste, followed by Agent Frank Horrigan, again triggering Surak to gain 4 counters and haste, while also triggering Frank to proliferate all his creatures twice. He then sends Raihan at Tom and the rest at John, having Frank trigger an additional time, making sure both John and Tom take the appropriate amount of damage to secure him the win.